Today we have the lead two authors from Global Pharmaceutical and Biologics Regulatory Strategy, Bill Sietsema and Monica Meacham. This book was published in March of 2020. It is the second edition. It is 260 pages roughly with 18 chapters and an index. And we had 28 authors who contributed to the second edition. So we're very excited to have it available at Convergence and to have the two leads here to talk to you about the book. During Convergence till the end of the conference, it is available to everyone for $100. So that's a discount it's a special Convergence rate. So you can stop by the bookstore and purchase, or if you have any questions about this book or any other books, you can come to the bookstore after the session and chat with me or Jen. But I wanted to go ahead and turn it over to Bill and Monica. They're going to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about the first edition versus this new edition, and then we're going to open it up for questions. So Bill and Monica, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Gloria, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining the discussion. My name is Bill Sietsema. I've been in the industry for 36 years now, and I've worked in CROs, I've worked for large pharma, I've worked for small pharma, done a little bit of everything, worked in drugs, biologics, and I'm currently in the cell therapy space, which I find to be extremely interesting. So with that, I'll turn it over to Monica to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Monica Meacham. I have been in the industry for about 12 years or more. I started out with a small startup biotech company and have worked in everything up to, I guess, medium-sized biotech companies. I've mostly focused on biologics, everything from cell therapy, gene therapies, I guess antibodies, just anything biologics, and excited to be here today and talk about the chapters and the second edition of the book and the changes that we made to the first edition. I guess, Bill, do you want to start out with maybe giving an overview of some of the big changes that were done on the chapters that you worked on?
Sure. Well, the first edition was published in 2016, and this new edition, of course, in 2020. And there's been a lot that's evolved in the regulations in those 4 years. It's been a busy 4 years for regulatory updates. So one of the things you'll find is that virtually all of the chapters have had some key updates that relate to changes in the regulations. And in addition to that, we added 2 new chapters. We added a chapter on companion diagnostic co-development strategies, and we added a chapter on medical writing strategies. So that's some additional new content that I think everyone will find useful.
Yeah, I think the main things that I found that are updates to the chapters that I worked on, well, first of all, several of the chapters had new contributors that were updating the chapters. So I think there's an added perspective from someone else in the field, along with just updates to regulations or guidances, best practices. There's also updates on, specific regional, I guess, strategies. For example, Chapter 14, the regulatory pathways, there was new sections added, which included information on Brazil, Australia, and Canada, whereas in the first edition, those locations were not included in that chapter. So I think there's additional information that could be useful to the readers. Any questions?
I was going to say, I'll ask a question for the group, and I think I've already talked to Bill and Monica about this. So I guess if someone is debating if they should purchase this volume, because they already have the first one. What would be the driving force for them to actually purchase the second edition?
Well, I think the new chapters and the updates, I think one would find that the first edition is a little bit out of date because it refers to regulations and guidances that have been superseded in the last 4 years. So I think it's important to always be working from the most current information.
Agreed. And as I had alluded to, I think there are some different perspectives and different, with the new contributors who updated the chapters, their experience has been added in, I guess their perspective on, what really is important for a regulatory strategy and certain things to consider. Some new figures, tables. So, there's new information that could be helpful.
Okay, so a question from the chat, someone is asking, does this version address the topic of state of the art?
Well, I think so. I'm not quite sure how state of the art applies in this case, but if it means, is it up to date with the current regulations, I would say yes. For now, who knows, in 2 or 3 years, it might not be, but at least today it is.
Okay. I was going to say, okay, I want to open it up to the group. If anyone has direct questions, if you unmute and ask your question, that would be great. Anybody? All right, I actually have another question. Can you please give specific example of a major change? A specific example of a major change?
One that I could cite is in the regulatory pathways chapter that's been revised and updated. It's an international chapter in the sense that it talks about regulatory pathways in various regions, and it represents recent updates in FDA pathways. Maybe Europe hasn't changed as much, but it adds countries that were not addressed in the first edition of the book.
Okay, I have another question from our chat. What are the references that the content of the book is based upon?
Probably.
Okay.
Go ahead, Bill.
I was going to say each chapter has its own reference list, and in general, where it's applicable, each chapter would reference regulations, guidance documents, public and sometimes not so public information. But it actually raises a good point, which is that the reference list for each of the chapters can be quite valuable as a resource for further investigation of particular issues. I always find that when I want to research a new issue, if I don't know, where to look, which is frequent, that going to one of these chapters will give me some ideas as to where I can look for further information. So I think the references are actually one of the more valuable elements of the book.
Right, and many of the chapters also provided links to certain websites that are either from regulatory health authorities or, like Bill said, public domains kind of for information, sometimes journal articles as well.
Gloria?
Yes.
Wow, it's actually connecting. I'm on VPN, and so I've been working for 3 days on workarounds, and so I switched over to my personal computer.
Okay, so you're here. Welcome.
I'm here. Hi. What I was referring to in state of the art is that as we're looking at new things that we have to meet, we keep seeing this phrase state of the art. And in a number of ways, I have heard people interpreting that as if it is for example, an ISO standard, but it's not a European norm, then even though the European norm has not been released or approved, that the ISO standard then is not state of the art. You have to go to the unapproved EN, but if it has not been released in the journal, then it still isn't completely effective. And so there's all of these discussions that I've heard going on around the world about, well, yes, this is what is released, but no, we have to meet this other one because that's state of the art, even though it isn't released. And that's the topic that I was trying to get clarified.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd have to go back and take a look at some of the chapters, but I don't recall that the ISO standards are referenced to a very great extent. So I'm not sure whether it actually addresses the questions you've asked.
Well,
Yeah,
when I
also
read it,
don't
I'll let
recall.
you know. I ordered it yesterday. I work with over 160 different countries. So, I try to keep up on what's going on.
Okay.
Okay. I
Thank
have another
you.
question from the chat, and it says, can you give us a tidbit on what we can find in the pediatric strategies section?
So I'm just opening that for reference here, but the pediatric strategy section was written by Klaus Rose, with a bit of help from me, I think. But Klaus is a European expert. His major area of expertise is the pediatric regulations in Europe, where he often consults with sponsors. But he goes through a pretty detailed review of how one approaches developing a pediatric strategy, how one works with the committee in Europe. He talks about how to negotiate, how to do PIP modifications. And he also gives some case studies and some scenarios. It then goes into an FDA section where he talks about how one approaches this with FDA, and the strategies, at least at this point in time, are probably going to be a bit different. And he talks about how you try to harmonize a European strategy versus a US strategy. I think as many of you may know, Europe takes a much stronger hand in the pediatric strategies versus the US FDA, and it often creates a difficulty when one wants to develop a strategy which is compatible with both regions.
Okay, I'm going to read you a comment from the chat from a participant, Patty Mendoza. She says, I have the last 2 editions of the book, and I wish it was possible for the book to come with a set of terminology, lingo, and or process map for generally how various regulatory processes go, similar to what Emergo does in their regulatory support docs. For someone new to RA, all the information is newish and the content is missing to make it stick, support the end user. Can the lead authors address that comment? And thank you, Patty, for your comment.
That's a really good suggestion. I think, that's something we can definitely consider for the future. I do like to hear feedback. I think, I'm curious to know if anyone does have the first edition, whether they found it useful, or what sort of information could be added to future editions that would make it even more useful. I think many of the chapters do try to define terms and provide process maps. It may not be all in one location, but I think it is kind of throughout the chapters. So I think maybe for someone newer in the regulatory field, it may be a little bit harder to put all the pieces together, but that is definitely a good suggestion.
Yeah, we had
actually, I have
yesterday.
Yeah, I actually have a question for Gloria in that regard. Didn't RAPS used to have a terminology book?
Yeah.
I think Jen, I believe so.
So we have the acronyms and definitions guides.
Mhm.
Yes, which right now we've actually transitioned to something we call Regipedia, which is
Yeah.
accessible online in the publications area of the website. It's something called Regipedia, which is essentially all of our acronyms and definitions guides across all of the regions in a more kind of interactive way. And again, online, not necessarily in a book format.
Yeah, yeah.
And another thing we actually did in the medical device strategy book, we did add a glossary, and that's a pretty easy thing we can do for all of our books. We can add a glossary, but I mean, I like that suggestion. I have another comment from chat. It says, I have the second edition and it has been extremely helpful. At times, I wish the content continued deeper into issues, but given the answer to every regulatory question, it depends, is not realistic to think the book could cover everything. But so thank you for that comment. And yeah, I think it's hard, and I can let the experts address this, but hard to cover every topic in its entirety. So you want to address that?
Yeah, but you know, you can always contact the authors as well if you'd like to dig deeper into it with the authors. I think any of the authors would be quite happy to receive a contact and try to help further.
Yeah, and it is true. It's hard to dig deeper. You know, it definitely depends, and I think that's where, you know, the challenges are for a regulatory professional is to take kind of the base information that you learn from, you know, the regulations from these sort of strategy books, and then see how your particular problem fits in with, you know, the information and what's the best path forward. It's not always going to be the same path for every product, every situation. So it requires a little bit of, you know, critical thinking, creativity to really try and find that best path forward. So that it depends is definitely a theme for the regulatory professional.
Yeah. You know, Gloria, I noticed that the second edition doesn't provide author emails, but maybe that's something we should think about for the next edition, you know, or other books that we're working on. I also want to get back to Patty's follow-up comment. You know, we talked about a glossary. I don't see any reason not to add a glossary to the end, and we can certainly do that for the third edition. We
Sure.
appreciate that suggestion.
Yeah, that's a pretty easy fix.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Again, you need to unmute and ask.
I want to go ahead. This is Jen. Oh, sorry. I want to go ahead and address one comment that's in there, a question about a discount code for the book.
Yeah.
And just to clear that up, there's actually no discount code. The discount that we're giving for Convergence is set in the store for anyone, as long as you purchase it within the Convergence store, which the link is in the chat.
I use these books for research all the time, and I really recommend them, especially the global ones. And I'd even like to volunteer to help with the third edition. So if you need any help, please let me know.
Okay. Well, Nancy, we're actually recruiting for a bunch of different books right now. So I can connect with you after this session, and we can talk about what's in the pipeline, and definitely get you on the list for the next iteration of this strategy book. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Hi.
Gloria, oh, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
This is Rosemary Kim from Immunity Bio. I just wanted to acknowledge that this book has been a great resource for me as well, especially if the company doesn't have a precedent or example of a document that I am starting. I would refer to this book, and this has been a great starting point. because it provides a great summary. I was just wondering, as I know both of you are full-time employees, how you find time to work on the side and prepare this book.
Well, thank you, Rosemary, for your comment. Rosemary is a dear colleague of mine, and I have seen her grow, and it's a compliment to hear, Rosemary, that you use it frequently.
Good compliment.
It is challenging to find the time to work on this. I guess I personally have to work evenings and weekends, which sometimes can be challenging given that I have 2 young children, but somehow I always find the time and kind of have to beg my husband sometimes to give me a full weekend to just kind of sit in front of the computer and work. But it's rewarding, especially hearing the comments that people find this useful. I know for myself, having, had several mentors in the past and constantly trying to seek out more information, it was useful to have books that I could kind of read, even if they were kind of general, just to kind of get that base information, to which then I can apply that to the specific situation. So it's challenging, but I think it's worth the challenge to find the time. Bill?
Yeah, it's a little easier for me to find the time because my kids are all growing up and take care of themselves. I don't know how Monica does it, but I of course have a full-time job, but a little extra time on evenings and weekends. At most, it competes with bicycle riding, so it's not that serious a problem.
And Rosemary, if I might just comment, if you're interested in volunteer opportunities on the book side of RAPS business, we have a lot of different ways you can contribute, even by reviewing chapters. If you didn't want to be a full chapter writer, I mean, Bill and Monica spent many hours as leads of this book because they're responsible for not only reviewing all the chapters, but making sure that the authors stay on task and on timeline. But we have a lot of opportunities as far as reviewing. So if you're interested, just contact me and we can find you a way to contribute that won't eat up a lot of your time. So, and then Patty Mendoza, do you want to, I see you sent me, I'm scared to click on that link because I don't want to lose my video. Do you want to give us your suggestion? I don't think she can hear me. Okay, I don't know if she's going to respond, but there is another question on the chat. Are there many real case studies in the book?
Yeah, there are case studies scattered throughout the chapters. I would estimate that maybe a fourth of the chapters have case studies. Certainly not all of them.
Yeah, one example that comes to mind is in the target product profile. I think there are a couple different examples given for a specific product and kind of some of the parameters around the product and what you may put within your target product profile for, optimal, acceptable and minimally acceptable options. So there are examples for sure that I think are helpful, and maybe in the future we can try to focus more on making sure there are more examples within each of the chapters.
Any other questions? We have a few more minutes. Okay, I can talk a little bit about how you can contribute. Again, I'm responsible for all the book production at RAPS. We're about to start recruitment for our International Fundamentals book, the 5th edition. But there, as I said, are many ways to contribute, either leading an effort, writing chapters, reviewing chapters. So I will be in the bookstore after the session if you want to come by and chat with me. If not, you can email me anytime, ghall@raps.org, and we can talk about ways you can contribute. But we have many books in the pipeline for 2021 that we're recruiting writers for. We put those call for authors usually on Regulatory Exchange and put those through the volunteer portal. So if you're interested, you can either contact me directly or look for those calls on Regulatory Exchange. I'm just trying to see if we have any more.
I just wanted to comment. Patty was asking about the Covey's Start with the End in Mind. That comes from 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, something that I read early in my career. It's a very good book if you haven't read it yet.
Okay. Any other questions? Bill, Monica, do you have anything, any closing thoughts?
Speaking for me, I'm greatly appreciative of the feedback on the book, and those are certainly actionable suggestions for our 3rd edition. And I would encourage everyone, if you do have questions, I'm happy to serve as a resource. You can find my email on the RAPS website in the member list. And I'm more than happy to lend my expertise free of charge to anyone who'd like to dig deeper. So.
Yeah, and I also want to thank everyone for participating. We've had some great questions today and definitely some great feedback. We work on these to support, the regulatory professionals out there, so it's helpful to get your feedback on how we can improve the product. So please feel free to send more suggestions. You should be able to find my personal email address on the RAPS website as well, and I'm happy to receive more comments and feedback.
Yeah, and I just wanted to reiterate, if you do have any further questions that you want to pose to the experts or to me, you can send an email directly to me, ghall@raps.org, and I can get them to the experts or I can help answer those. But I appreciate everyone's time today. It was a great session. I appreciate the experts taking the time to participate and tell us a little bit about this revision. And if you have any further questions, I will be in the bookstore. You can come chat with me or Jen. And I hope you have a great rest of Convergence.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.